Alrighty, guys. Welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. So hopefully you guys are all doing well. And we have our panel of James, Cullen, and Anastasia today. So tonight's webinar, as you guys know, is going to be on what to do after selective. And obviously everybody here has scored 99.95, so they're pretty qualified to explain what you guys need to do after selective. Okay, so I want you guys all comment down below in the chat if you can hear us. If everything is coming in loud and clear, and yeah, we'll get started. Okay, so how about you guys just introduce yourselves a little bit, give a little bit of a breakdown of who you guys are. We'll start with Cullen and then we'll go around to Anastasia and then finish with King James. Okay, so Cullen, you're muted. Oh, sorry, let me unmute you. Give me a second. Let me unmute. Okay, there we go.
All right, thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. I'm Cullen. I'm currently studying sports medicine at University of Sydney. And again, as Steve mentioned, I did the HSC. And so I have a bit of insight that I'd like to share with you guys today towards what best to do after selective and, some tips for high school, that kind of thing. And because I'm very passionate about, medicine and that kind of thing, also some tips towards achieving that, if that is some of your guys' goals.
Cool. Excellent. So, Cullen, you want to tell everybody at what age did you get a 99.95? Like, what age did you get it? Do you remember? Sorry,
the muting thing. Yeah, so I was 16 when I graduated, just about to turn 17.
Excellent. Cool. Awesome. But yeah, he's not the youngest person to get a 99.95. There's somebody who's younger. So, Anastasia, give a little bit of a background.
Yep.
Yeah.
So welcome, guys. My name is Anastasia. Yes, I was also 16 when I got my 99.95. I wasn't turning 17 though, so Colin's cheating on that one. But yeah, so as you guys all know, I'm also studying medicine at the University of Sydney. So if you guys have any questions on that, of course, feel free to let us know. I'm a bit of a STEM specialist as well. So any questions on maths, sciences, let me know how you guys find it and we can answer all that for you.
Cool. Excellent. And then James.
Hey guys, I'm James, as well as Anastasia and Cullen. I'm a Sydney medical student in the double degree medicine program. And I'm not as smart as these guys. I didn't graduate when I was 16, but I still have pretty good perspective on how to achieve well in high school. And as a high school tutor particularly, I'm interested in not only getting really good results, but making sure these kids are enjoying themselves, having a really fun time in our high school foundations classes.
Awesome. Cool. So we have a couple of questions that we need to talk about today. And so I think let me quickly pull it up. The first question is, the importance of English. And I think, a lot of parents after they finish the selective schools test, they don't really quite appreciate, how the English that is, or the English and the maths, but mainly the English that is taught at a selective level is very, very different to the English that is, taught in high school. Okay. And I think a lot of parents kind of don't understand or, underestimate the level of difficulty of English in high school until it's kind of too late. You're 11, year 12. So Colin, would you agree with that? And what are your thoughts on that kind of process?
Yeah, definitely. I think English is something that dramatically shifts when moving into the later stages of high school. I think, as many of the scholarly students are aware, English initially is a lot of kind of reading comprehension, analyzing things. And then in high school, it shifts quite, significantly into how you write, how you express those ideas. And so I think what a lot of people aren't prepared for really is taking their great ideas. I've seen some absolutely amazing students in English who can analyze things and talk to me about it. But when it's about kind of writing it formally, writing it structurally, that's kind of what gets a lot of people in that trap. And so I think, all the way through high school, there's not enough kind of, one-on-one time for students to realize the importance of this. And, English is a subject that is very easy to be very generic and vague with in instruction. So during the, teaching sessions throughout high school, usually very vague tips, that kind of thing. Maybe you get a bit of feedback during your assessments, but really it's very easy to kind of get complacent with it. And then by the time you get into HSC, year 11, 12, that kind of area, then you really realize, oh no, I need to be able to express my thoughts in a very sophisticated way. And often, unless you've prepared leading up to that, it's a very difficult jump to make.
Cool. Anastasia, can you talk about that as well? So like, what were some ways that you prepared for kind of like English? Were you preparing like consistently? Did you like consistently improve your essay writing throughout the years? Or was that something that you did more in like year 11, year 12? Actually, sorry, you did year 11 and year 12 when you were like 15 or 16, but yeah, how did you organize that? You know what I mean? Like, you know, did you do it all at the end when you were like 16, or did you start when you were like 11 or 12 and then work your way up?
Yeah, I think the key is consistency for sure. I think the people that leave it till year 11 and 12 are leaving it a bit too late, because there is a massive, massive jump from year 10 to year 11. And I'm sure a lot of people have noticed that, like parents as well in the past that obviously start like year 10, year 11 and so on. There's a big jump. So if you leave it to year 11, in my opinion, it's definitely a bit too late. You can still do stuff, you can still definitely improve, but why not do it from year 7? Why stress yourself so much in year 11 and 12 when you've got an opportunity even from now, like year 6, where you're yet to start year 7, but you finished selective, you've done all that. Why not start from now? Why not give yourself the head start so that you're a lot less stressed when it comes to year 11 and 12? And it's definitely a big jump. As Colin said, I think my class the other day that I was teaching for English noticed that as well, because we went from doing trial tests and comprehension questions to reading a novel and writing essays in 1 week, right? And it's a very, very different system. It's completely different the way you analyze, the way you have to articulate yourself. So I would say start as early as you can.
Yeah. So I think the big mistake that parents make is the mistake of coasting in year 7 to 10. So most, I think, students and parents during year 7 to 10 realize, oh, you know what, we don't have exams until like, you know, year 11 and 12. And so we can just coast. And the other thing is at school, you're definitely not pushed from year 7 to 10 to really like work like super duper hard. And so James, can you comment on like, what is that gap like between year 10 and year 11? Because there's like quite a significant gap. Can you talk to me about like kids that you saw who like, you know, year 7 to 10, what they were kind of doing and like maybe struggling to make that leap, and like kind of what you'd recommend instead? Like, what was it like?
So the way I think of the 3 stages, so you've got selective sort of English, then you've got your 7 to 10 English, then you've got year 11 and 12 English. So selective English is essentially English as a science. It's like strictly answering multiple choice questions. It's trying to get it down to a science. And then 7 to 10, you make this massive leap where you're now conceiving of English as like an art. You're trying to express yourself the best. You're trying to really analyze in depth some of these texts. And then year 11 and 12, you really, really begin to refine those ideas. And the step up from year 7 to 10 compared to year 11 and year 12 is 7 to 10, you're doing much easier novels, and you're also doing much easier texts that you're analyzing in terms of English comprehension. So the problem there is that if you're a smart student, like a lot of the kids at Scholarly, you can really coast and it's not too hard. Whereas once you get to a year 11 and 12 level, if you don't have the real foundational skills in English, then the translation from coasting in year 7 to 10 compared to writing a really strong essay in year 11 and 12 is quite a big step up.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that, James. I think the next question that a lot of parents ask is, you know, what are the pathways to kind of medicine, right? So in that, how important is, you know, working on things like English, maths, and science in like lower years to medicine? And can you guys comment on if you want to do medicine, let's say at a local like New South Wales kind of you know, school, like university, like UNSW, UWS, which is a fine institution, or, you know, New England, which is an even finer institution? How do you go about, like, what do you do there? So, you know what I mean, Colin? Like, what kind of subjects should you choose? What kind of subjects should you work on, like at a younger age?
I think anyone who's kind of aspiring to do medicine, and really it applies to a lot of similar degrees that are very difficult to get into. I think a lot of the focus should be on, you know, overall being well-rounded and having, you know, an overall good mark, because the problem with medicine is because it's so competitive, really being really, really good at maths and being, you know, even the best in the state at maths can't get you far enough unless your other subjects are there to support it. And so in terms of, you know, choosing subjects and which kind of subjects to select, it's really about having a balance between English, maths, and science, which are really those kind of big three subjects that, are going to make up a lot of your mark. And so essentially being able to understand English, maths, and science as a balance from early high school, from, year 7 to 10, is really, really crucial, because by the time you get into 11 and 12, all three of those start getting really crazy. And again, in order to get into medicine or law or any kind of really high striving degrees, you definitely need to be focusing on that big three, right? Not just focusing on maths, not just focusing on science. Like, I have some friends who were amazing at maths, amazing at science, even one friend that was, amazing at English as well. But each of them, while they were aspiring to get into very difficult degrees, they didn't make it because they didn't focus on the balance of all three, which I think is something that goes underappreciated often.
Can you explain to the audience, Colin, like, what do you mean by like science? Like, what does that look like? And why should they study science in year 7 to 10 and not just leave it to like year 11 and 12? What makes it so difficult to do? Like, let's say, why can't people just pick up chemistry and physics in year 11 and 12 and just not study anything about like photosynthesis or whatever in year 7 to 10? Like why?
It's a good question. The thing that I think is the biggest influence there is the fact that year 11 and 12 science, there's no such thing anymore as just science, right? You actually have to specialize in either chemistry, physics, biology. Those are the main ones. There are some other ones as well. But the idea is that picking those specialties are very beneficial for getting a high A to high mark, because those science subjects scale really highly. But the problem is that they scale really highly, but they are difficult. They are very specialized knowledge. And so if you just go through year 7 to 10, kind of coasting as you're mentioning, and kind of just getting by in year 7 to 10 science, when you get into the specialized sciences, chemistry, physics, biology, it's going to be a big struggle, because you're taking what you only had a surface level knowledge of and transforming it into a whole subject. So really, I think it's more important in year 7 to 10 to build up an understanding of science in general, and take a holistic approach where what's biology, what's chemistry, what's physics, you're learning each of them and strengthening each of them. And that way you can actually appreciate, what you actually like. Because in science, at least when I was in school, they didn't really make a big enough emphasis of like, okay, guys, we're doing biology this term. This is going to be what you kind of do in biology. It all just kind of lumped together as science in my mind. So when I was going to choose subjects, I didn't really know what I was good at, what I was knowledgeable about. And it was more difficult to kind of get into those specialized. But yeah, that's essentially it. I think just basically having a good foundation of the sciences in year 7 to 10 is crucial for succeeding when you start to do more specialized sciences in year 11 and 12.
Cool. Excellent. Touching on that, James, what do you think about like, obviously you're a esteemed UCID like medicine scholar. Like, what subjects do you guys do now, and how does that relate to stuff that you might have learned in high school?
So it's quite different, but it's really building on the same fundamental ideas that you learn in the 3 core sciences, physics, particularly chemistry and biology though. So at the moment, I'm studying physiology and I'm also studying anatomy. So anatomy is the one you hear about all the time. That's just the study of the structure of the human body. And then physiology goes a step further, and it's a study of the human body, but also its function and how it works. So anatomy is a heavy emphasis on biology and the sort of human biology that you're going to learn in year 11 and 12. But then physiology goes a step further, as I said, and it combines those ideas on a really high level with ideas in chemistry, biochemistry, and those sorts of things, chemical reactions, and how that works on a very specific way within the body. So once you have those, well, it's essentially necessary to have those fundamental ideas when you enter into any science course, or particularly medicine courses, because especially a couple of them will have those sorts of subjects as prerequisites that you need to do before you study them, or you're going to be out of your depth.
Are there people who struggle in medicine, or like, let's say even in your science subjects that you've noticed? Yeah, definitely. Sometimes I'm sure that Cullen, Anastasia, they can both attest to the fact that at points they will struggle as well, even though they've done really well in year 11 and 12, because it really definitely is a step up. And the level of content as well is truly astounding. Like, for example, I'm studying at the moment for my physiology final exams,
And just going through the lectures, a single 1 hour lecture is probably equivalent to maybe what you learn in 2 weeks during year 12. Like, it's truly a step up. It's pretty incredible, honestly.
Yeah, cool. I think this is a question more for Cullen and Anastasia. Maybe Anastasia, you can take this. So how do you grade skip or radically grade skip? Because most schools seem to be against it.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was a different experience for Colin, but for me, I skipped 2 grades at 2 different points in my schooling. So I went from year 2, and instead of doing year 3, I went to year 4. I did year 3 for 2 weeks, and I was like incredibly bored in class. Like, I was so bored that the teachers literally pulled me out and they were like, "You're finishing the work very quickly. Let's test you. Like, let's do your end of year exams and let's see sort of where you're at and if you want to move up." And so that's what happened with that. It was definitely a case of like, I would come home from school and I would be like to my parents, "I am so bored. Like, I am learning nothing in this class. There's nothing in this class that's engaging for me. I feel like I'm just going to school and sitting there and wasting time." So if you are in a situation like in a similar position where you are very bored, not because you're a bad student, you don't want to pay attention, just because you've seen it before and you feel like you're ahead of that, raise it with your parents and raise it with your teachers, because it's not the type of thing that you can just magically skip. They will have to do testing on you. They will have to check sort of where you're at academically, because it is a big thing to skip an entire year. And then the second time that I skipped was from year 6 to year 7. So I'm not sure if you guys know this. I feel like I've mentioned it before, but I do some of my schooling overseas. And overseas, you start schooling in September, like in the Northern Hemisphere, and you finish in June. So I had done like half of year 6, and I was coming to Australia where it was already term 3 of year 7. So it was either I go to term 3 of year 6 or I go to term 3 of year 7. So I did the entrance exams. Again, it's basically just doing like the selective test. It's just doing all your entrance exams for whatever school you want to get into. And that is how they determined where to put me. But I think if you do want to skip, like if you're interested in that sort of process, you definitely need to talk to the school administrators. You need to talk to your parents, and you have to be very, very serious about it. It's not an easy thing. They will not let you do it. It's not very common. So you have to make sure that you're very, very, very confident if you want to make that decision.
I think parents are going to be curious about like, how does that affect, like, do you think that's been better for you in like, you know, how I know obviously in your case, it's turned out for the better, but you hear about a lot of child prodigies who are like 12 and they do 4-unit maths and stuff like that. What have you noticed to be the pros and cons of skipping grades?
I would say that the cons can be mostly in the younger years. Like, I mean, when I started year 7, I was like 10 years old, literally. So that is definitely very, very, very different to a lot of the other kids that are like 13, right? So I was 10 turning 11, which is definitely very weird at first. And it is something you definitely have to adjust to. I do think though that going into the older years, the pros definitely outweigh the cons. Especially like for me, I always sort of knew I was interested in medicine. I was tossing between other things, but medicine was always there for me for a young age as a career that I was looking at. And medicine is a very, very, very long degree, as you guys all know. It's an undergrad, a postgrad, then you want to specialize, you have to do further study. So for me, if I could get a head start on that, that was sort of the vision that I had. It was a long-term vision where I thought, even if it might be a little bit awkward at first until you adjust socially, which yes, you will have to adjust because you are skipping sort of those emotional maturity years as well. I do think in the long term, it can be quite good for you. But I do think it also depends on your experience. If you have a good support network around you, if your parents are there and you're able to form like good friendships at school, you'll be completely fine.
Cool. Awesome. And yeah, I think that's really important, because what age would you graduate medicine then? Like, even though you're doing a postgrad course?
I'll finish my undergraduate finishes at 19. And then my postgraduate finishes at 23, when most of the people would be 25.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool. Cullen, any thoughts on that? Like, how was it like for you?
Well, I agree with a lot of the things Anastasia was saying in terms of the pros and cons. My process of skipping grades was much less, I suppose, dramatic, because I started almost a year young. And I just went from the end of kindy to year 2. And it wasn't really that much of a difference because during those years, a lot of it's kind of, a lot of, discipline and very simple kind of tasks and, establishing very basic, knowledge and that kind of thing. So I didn't find it was a very drastic difference in terms of the education side of it. But I think socially it does have a big impact. So anyone who has this opportunity does have to consider the fact that, you are going to be 2 years or 1 year younger than everyone in your grade. And so, although it doesn't really have an impact when you get to the later years of schooling, as Anastasia was mentioning, I mean, again, I'm very thankful that my pathway worked out this way, given that, I will be finishing medicine, again, like Anastasia said, 2 years before, or at a younger age than a lot of other people. So it gives me like a lot more opportunity, because when you start to get to the end of your university degree, you start really thinking in terms of the time that you have in your life, and being at a certain age and only just starting to work with a degree that's 7 years is quite frightening for a lot of people. So I think it's an advantage, but again, there are a lot of pros and cons to consider. I must say it's not a process that should be grasped at any opportunity. It should be really kind of broken down and considered, even if it's at such like a young primary age that this is doing. I think the future implications must be very thoroughly considered.
Cool. That's great. I have nothing to add to that. So thank you guys for that very in-depth explanation. We have a question from, I think, Jackie Chu. She says, hello teachers, when you say kids should prepare young, but schooling from year 7 to 10 is not as in-depth and breadth as you would need them to be for senior years, what can parents do? And also, how can you encourage a child to prepare young as well? So James, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question. So in terms of encouraging your kid to prepare young, like you've got a long journey across 6 years of high school. So you sort of want to pace yourself. You want to make sure you're ahead of others maybe and making sure you're tracking well, but you also want to pace yourself. And I think the best way to do that is to make sure that your kid is actually enjoying it, that the work they're doing is stimulating, that the work they're doing is interesting, and that maybe not every class that they go to, they're going to be, this is exactly what I want to do at this moment. Maybe they'll want to be outside playing sport. Maybe they'll be wanting to play their instrument or something. But just ensuring that a good majority of the time or a good bulk of the time that this is the sort of thing that interests them. So for example, in my high school foundation science class, what I see and the sort of atmosphere and temperature check that I get in the class, the sort of vibe that exists in that class is these kids are actually enjoying what we're doing. And that's sort of how I like to approach the classes, not just presenting the material to these kids, but sort of pressing on what they're enjoying and pressing on the sort of material that it seems like they would want to learn on, going on interesting tangents so these kids are actually enjoying themselves, which I think is pretty interesting. Like actually, for example, in my science class today, we were talking about tigers and lions, and then I went on a tangent about ligers and tigons, which are different species where you interbreed lions and tigers, which was pretty interesting to some of these kids. They're pretty fascinated by that.
Yeah, so I think to answer your question, Jackie, what James means to say is to find inspirational teachers who can kind of allow kids to especially explore, gain general knowledge, develop a deep, profound interest towards subjects like English, maths, and science. Because I'm pretty sure all of us had very motivational teachers or very interesting teachers who encourage us to explore those interests, especially in year 7 to 10. They actually find a lot of joy, innate joy, in studying these subjects and not just go with the schooling system. Now, practically, what that would mean is obviously encourage them to explore more at school, but it would also mean that from year 7 to 10, it's probably a good idea to go to a tutoring college. It doesn't have to be scholarly, but it's probably a pretty good idea to go there. Now, in the year 7 to 10 market, to be completely frank, there are not many very good tutoring colleges. There are some big box names like Matrix. I'm not going to make a comment on how good they are, but I would argue that scholarly HSF is, better than, these ones out there. So, and Cullen, Anastasia, and James do teach the classes for year 7 to 10 at scholarly. Anyway, okay, so hopefully that's clear. We have a question from Cruz Gemnatus, who said, if you wanted to be a CEO of a company, what degree would you take? Just curious, as I find CEO very appealing, and I know that it'll probably be an extreme odyssey. Thanks. Okay, so interesting question. I think I'll probably take this one because I'm the only person here without a job. So basically, what I would say is if you want to be a CEO at a company, you should probably still learn how to speak, read English. Maths is still pretty important because you need to do profit loss statements. You need to be able to calculate, multiply, do all of these numbers. So what I would say is you need to do the same thing, which is study very, very hard, from year 7 to 12. I'd say if you want to be a CEO of a company, it's even more reason to actually get all your studies done by 18 and get a very, very good ATAR. Not because you actually need to get a good ATAR because you need to go to university or whatever, but instead because if you're going to build a company or any company for that reason, you want to be smart, you want to be competitive, you want to be able to compete, to treat it as a game. So that's what I would say. In terms of a degree that you would take, I would basically say like there are people who do medical degrees, right, who end up becoming like big CEOs. Like what's that guy? The guy who opened up the Mexican food restaurant. Do you know that guy?
Yeah, I think he went to UCID, didn't he?
Yeah, he went somewhere.
Zambaro or something.
Yeah, Zambaro or something, right? He $400 million company, probably worth $1 billion. You know what I mean? He did a medical degree. Obviously you don't have to go to university if you want to be a CEO of a company, but I would say, you probably should, you know what I mean? So I personally would say go to university anyway. What kind of degree? You can really do anything that basically exercises your mind. So medicine would be like a good example. There's a lot of interesting things going on in med tech, telehealth. I know a couple of guys who are involved in like a telehealth company based out in Singapore that's worth close to $1 billion. So, there's a lot of angles that you can take. You can do law, you can do business. Like business degree is kind of useless, but you can do it if you want. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. How many people want to be CEOs? Does everybody want to be a CEO? Yeah, no? Okay, cool. Let's move on. Let's go to the next question. So how hard is it to do IB and still get into medical school? Anastasia, how about you take this one?
So in terms of the like raw academic side of it, they have recently changed the conversion rates. So I'm sure you guys have probably heard like rumors that IB was like overinflated and that there were a lot of people getting very high ATARs. That's changed. So now the conversion rate is quite different. If you get a 45 out of 45, which is the highest you can get in the IB, that does not guarantee you a 99.95. Right? So they actually look at specifically like how much above the grade boundary you are for each subject, if you scored very, very high, or if you just scraped past, and that will determine your ATAR. So that definitely affects your entry into medicine, particularly for a place like UCID, which is obviously a 99.95 ATAR requirement. For other universities that have slightly lower ATARs, but also have UCAT requirements, it's not as big of an effect. Also, in terms of the number of people that get in from doing IB or HSC. As far as I know, and they don't really release this information, they don't really give any quotas for like how many HSC kids, how many IB kids they will let into each course. But I can tell you that at least in our cohort, there are definitely less IB kids than HSC kids. So that's just an observation. We don't know for sure whether there is a quota or anything like that. It is tricky, but I don't think it is any easier or harder necessarily than HSC. Whether you do IB or HSC, if you want a 99.95, you'll need to work hard and it will be difficult to get there, but you can definitely do it and it's definitely achievable.
Cool. Excellent. So Vidya just asked, how do I help my kid discover his passion? So Colin, you want to take that one? So how do you discover your passion?
That's a fantastic question. I think that it's not something you should, try and push someone towards. I know many people, including myself, and I think James has spoken before about, not really finding the true passion for what you want to do for a career or for the rest of your life until, late in high school. I mean, in my year in school, upon graduating, so actually finishing year 12, there was still maybe a third of the year who didn't really know what they wanted to do. So I would say that in terms of discovering a passion, it's not something you want to force someone into. You don't want to kind of, push them towards different things in hopes that it will click. I think just, basically create an inquisitive attitude in your child and try and help that. And it's kind of like what we were mentioning before with, making kids excited to learn. Because if your child is excited to learn things and actually interested in gaining new knowledge, they will seek out the knowledge that they want to learn, and that will actually guide their passion. But someone who's just kind of just rote learning, just doing all their exams, all their, you know, homework just to get by, those are the people that are going to be stuck, you know, not really ever clicking with anything because they haven't been interested in looking at it in a kind of educational way, and trying to grow by learning. So basically be inquisitive, love what you learn. And if you do find something you enjoy, follow it. Okay. Don't try and, you know, restrict hobbies or anything like that. It's very important to kind of cultivate those and really any interests and that kind of thing to really promote those and support those. I think that's what I can say.
Yeah, so I would actually, let's add on to that. What are some qualities, because I saw a question earlier, what are some qualities, Colin, that you think high achievers typically have? What are some like traits that you notice? Because inquisitiveness is one of them, right? What are some other things that you've noticed among, you know, just smarter kids, you know, people that you've seen in life, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's a lot of people who are very different, but some things that they have that they have in common, as you mentioned, basically it's almost essential to have a love for learning. And I think because there's only so far that just forcing yourself to study, forcing yourself to learn is going to get you. Unless you actually enjoy the process of expanding your knowledge, expanding the way you look at the world, that's what gets you to a really high achieving state. I also think that something that's very, very important that a lot of high achievers share is the ability to communicate your thoughts. And it's something that goes underappreciated. I think taking people who just get good marks and then the people that end up really succeeding, I think the difference there is the ability to, you know, again, want to communicate with others and have that ability to express thoughts. So it's not just about the book smarts. I think a trait that a lot of high achievers I have, you know, associated with have in common is the, you know, a strength in expression, basically, and being able to talk with others freely and basically having that ability. And you can, you know, you can promote that ability. You can encourage social connections, encourage communication, encourage, you know, public speaking, debating. I think those things are really crucial. And that's a trait that I see come up very commonly in high achieving students.
Yeah, I'd say resilience as well is probably pretty high in most high achieving students. Obviously, we're dealing with three pretty naturally gifted individuals here, like Colin, James, and Anastasia, but I'd say resilience is huge for the ordinary person or the ordinary IQ person. We have another question from Samar who says, my son's only obsessed with gaming, coding, and YouTubing. Is this normal for his age range? What do you think, James?
I think that's pretty normal, but I was reading that comment and I'm like, your kid's interested in coding. Coding is an awesome skill. Coding is one of the things that in the 21st century, it's one of the most monetizable skills and one of the skills that's just going to transform our society. Things like machine learning, artificial intelligence. So if your son can learn those skills, that's going to set him up very, very well. And if you can sort of find a passion within that niche, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I would very much argue that if your son becomes the key thing is if he enjoys coding, he needs to be a good coder, right? So if he enjoys coding, encourage him to do more coding. Like I spend a few $100,000 every single year on just coding, right? Like on coders. So, and I don't like my software isn't that great, but that's how much good coders cost nowadays. So I would say that alongside medicine's generally seen as a pretty secure career. Obviously, most who would do it don't really do it for the money, but the financial incentive of doing so is that it's rather secure compared to most other industries. And I would say, especially in a Commonwealth country like Australia, UK, or Canada, generally salaries are always going to be quite high because, you know, it's protected by the government. Whereas I would say in basically every single other industry, you got to be very, very careful over the next few years due to AI. So I think coding is great. Coding is probably one of the only things that are going to be like, you know, you're going to be taken care of. All other industries are going to be slightly questionable there. All right. Okay, cool. Anything you guys want to add to that? Coding, like no, all good. Okay.
I from people I know, the thing is with computer science, which is a degree that is basically what people who love to code often transfer into. It's only a 3-year degree, and it has as Steve was saying, even though you do it for the love of it, it does have very, very good financial prospects afterwards. So in terms of, like just getting out into the world and starting to earn a lot of money, I think computer science is about as good as it gets these days.
Yeah, like most of my friends who are in the mid-20s who make an extraordinary amount of money. So we're talking $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 at 25, 26. These individuals are generally in tech sales, okay? And so that just shows you like, if like tech sales is really, really good now. I know individuals who are worth up to $30 million at age 30. And all they've done is they've taken a whole bunch of tech stock because they've been awarded stock options in certain tech companies. And all they've done is just done sales for tech companies and made $400,000, $500,000 every single year, more stock options. And they have a net worth of about $30 million at age 30. You know what I mean? So that's just, and that's like a big, big thing now. So I'd say anything technology related is pretty good. And there is a huge, like I think there's like a huge demand and very, very little supply for like good developers. So if you do learn coding and you're very good, then you're great. And in Australia, especially because Australia is such an island, if you're very good at coding, you're in super duper high demand. Because honestly, everybody who comes out of computer science in Australia is not very good at coding, to be completely honest. So if you're good, and they still make a lot, but if you do coding and and you're good and you're from Australia, then you're just going to kill it. What degree do you need to become a marine biologist? I think you need a Bachelor of Marine Biology, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Which industries and professions can become focus areas in 10 areas with the advent of AI? What do you think about that, James?
Well, that's a pretty complex question, and I'm not a fortune teller, so I won't profess to have the absolute view of the future right here. But I think that it's probably going to expand. I think it's probably going to massively change the medical sector. I think those are the sort of projections that we have at the moment. I think it's going to massively change certain innovative technologies that are just going to rise out of nowhere that we can't even predict, like entrepreneurship and business. It's also just going to change different sectors in different companies. This is just my personal view. Like there are all different things within companies that can be changed in the ways they happen with AI. For example, there are different ways that businesses can run. There are different jobs that are going to change in how they are done and who does them. I think it's going to have a massive impact on society. I think those are the sort of projections that we see in the media at the moment, at least.
Yeah, I think the key is, I think echoing what James has said, in terms of AI, I don't think it's going to replace everyone. I think specialists and people who are very, very good at what they do are still going to exist. But generalists, not saying that GPs are not going to have a job, but people who are more generalist, people who are like part of the, the bulk of the bell curve are probably going to need to either, they're going to get eliminated or they're going to need to retrain.
Yeah, just on that as well. So what people say about AI in medicine is that AI can be very good for certain things. Like it can do things in radiology, it can do things in diagnostics, but there's always going to need to be that human interface between the science that the AI can do and telling that to a patient and relaying that information to a patient. So there are certain things that can never be replaced by AI. And humanity is one of those things.
If my kid wants to study law in the University of Sydney, which subjects should be chosen? How much ATAR is needed? I would personally suggest that your child to not study law unless they're very, very smart and they're very, very good, because law is literally going to get replaced as the very first thing. Like it's just going to get replaced so quickly. It's not even funny. Anything that you want contractually done now can be done through ChatGPT. Anything, any kind of legal provisions that you want to write up can be done through ChatGPT 4. And so, law is not a profession that you really want to be going into now. There's massive oversupply. Do medicine instead, choose another subject, just don't do law. You know what I mean? Because, even after going to law, studying law for like 5 years, graduating from the University of Sydney, I just tell you over the next 10 to 15 years, everyone's going to get eliminated because we don't need anybody to write contracts anymore when you can just write them yourself. So I wouldn't recommend it. But yeah, if you do want to study law, if you do, then obviously studying English, writing is huge. Subjects like legal studies should be chosen. And if you want to go to Sydney Uni, I'm pretty sure it's 99.5. Okay, cool. Try studying doctor. I don't think that will be replaced. If my kid wants to be a fashion designer, what subjects should she do? Anastasia, what subjects do you reckon they should do?
Oh, I've got a friend who's studying like a degree like that at UTS actually. It is definitely do textiles in year 12 if that's something that you're interested in. I would usually combine it with something else. I mean, obviously that's not what I'm taking, but if I was going to be looking at being a fashion designer, I would try to do a double degree with some sort of business degree, because just having the fashion side of it won't actually help you create a company or build all these fashion empires that you see around you. Like, I think for that sort of industry, marketing is very, very, very important. So of course, make sure you go into a degree that has the artistic side of it and has industry experience, but also make sure that you've got the foundation knowledge that you need to actually do something with those skills.
Yeah. So one thing that I would add on to what Anastasia said is, I think whatever career, whatever degree that you choose, make sure that you choose something that you're going to be competitive in, and make sure that you're actually going to be good at it. Okay. I think that's something to really keep in mind, especially as we go towards a world where there's only going to be universal basic income. And basically, if you're not very good at your job, you don't really need to work anymore. So I think that's incredibly important in the coming few years. The other thing is, I think if you're still young, if you're in year 7 or you're in year 6 right now, and you're looking at the future, understand that things are just going to be more expensive than ever before. You're most likely not going to be able to afford a house by yourself. And so you really need to be at the very, very top in order to, I would say, live a life worth living. You know what I mean? And so for that reason, I would highly recommend that whether you want to become a fashion designer, whether you want to be a lawyer, whether you want to be whatever, you can succeed at all of these things. You know what I mean? But it's very, very important that you are academically competitive, because that's the only real thing that you can work on right now. You know what I mean? You can work on other things. You can, build a business when you're like 12, 13. I opened my first eBay store when I was like 12. But, again, I would say studying is the one thing that you kind of have to do when you're in year 7 to 12. It's not something that you can avoid. You can't skip high school. So you might as well do it well. That's my personal opinion. Okay. When should you start thinking about your career? Colin, do you want to take this one? When did you start thinking about your career? When should you start? And yeah.
It's a good question. I think thinking about a career is something you can do as soon as possible. You can start thinking about what you enjoy. It's really something that you should kind of, be doing as you go through school. What you might think is the perfect career for you now, in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, might not be the case. So I think thinking about what your passions are in life is just a great thing to be doing. But when should I start if you're asking when should you start, narrowing down what career I want or forcing myself to pick a career, it really shouldn't be until much, much later, because again, passions change, your interests change, your abilities, your affinities, all those kind of things, they change as you grow and mature throughout high school. So I think it's important not to lock yourself into anything at the moment. Just try, as Steve was saying, being academically competitive, having that kind of inquisitive approach to learning, always wanting to learn more, that kind of thing. But thinking about a career, thinking about what you could see yourself doing is just a great thing any kid to be doing from any age, I think, just to be considering it. But it's nothing that you should narrow down and lock yourself into at any age until you have to make a final decision, really.
The thing that I would say to that is to keep your options open. Like Colin says, you have to work hard academically. That's very, very important. So oftentimes, I think the issue with people giving the advice of, hey, you don't really need to know what you're going to do. The problem is people just don't think about, okay, well, if I do want to keep my options open as possible, what kind of academic requirements are needed for the certain subjects? So maybe Anastasia, you could talk about what is it like to get into NSW medicine, law, kind of what kind of ATAR is required to your knowledge, and when do kids need to kind of think about that, if anything?
I think, just to echo what everyone said so far, you absolutely need to maintain your academics if you want to keep those options open. Because if for some reason you have some life-changing event that happens in year 12 and you decide, I want to do medicine now, it's too late, right? If you haven't been focusing on that, you literally need a 99.95 to get into usage medicine. And if you look at other medical degrees in New South Wales, if we're looking at somewhere like NSW, they claim it's around a 96 ATAR, but every person I know that's gotten into UNSW medicine has at least a 99.5 ATAR. So they're all very, very, very high achieving degrees. Law as well, it's 99.5 at UCID. It's, I think, a 97-ish at UNSW. So when you're trying to keep your options open, no matter what degree you want to do, you definitely want to try get that ATAR. Even if you're looking at a degree that has a lower entry ATAR, they still do give you quite a few benefits at university if you do enter with a high ATAR. There's things like scholarships that are very, very, very useful for a lot of people, no matter what degree you're doing. Even if you're going into an 80 ATAR degree, you're going to get scholarships from the university. You're going to get extra opportunities for your scores as well. So those are other pathways that you can consider as well that definitely would factor into your decision.
Cool. Excellent. Yeah, I would echo everything that Anastasia said. Okay, so Colin, Anastasia, and James, were you very keen on medicine because of passion or career opportunities in Australia? James?
Now, I mentioned this story last year, I remember, on a webinar, but I haven't mentioned it recently, so I'll sort of repeat it. My path to medicine was very different to a lot of people's. Up until essentially, it was either year 11 or year 12, I wanted to go into law. I wanted to follow the steps of Steve Zhu. I wanted to walk his path to do a commerce law degree at the University of Sydney. But then it was actually a very specific moment of serendipity. It was at a Friday evening debate. So I was on the debating team at school, and the debate essentially centered around what we were arguing was that doctors go into medicine not because of the pay, but because this is a career that they really want to do. They want to help people and improve people's lives. And in that moment, that idea really resonated with me. And I realized that I didn't really want to work an office job anymore. I wanted to have a career in medicine where every day I could do something where I'm helping someone. I'm helping to improve their quality of life, whether that's an elderly person who I'm giving them a hip replacement, or whether I'm diagnosing someone with a disease and giving them some medicine which can radically change their life and their life expectancy. That was something that really resonated with me in that moment and essentially drove me during year 12, that passion towards getting into medicine after school. So I guess the answer to your question would be passion was what drove me.
I think the other thing is it's very hard, I'd say, to get into medicine nowadays without passion, right? Because viewers can generally see you don't really have too much passion going in, especially if you go into like a school like UCID. So yeah, cool. Any other questions? Thanks for the webinar. He's interested in space and aerodynamics. How can we, as parents, support him? Cullen? Space and aerodynamics.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know very specifically about the area, but I think with any interest, I would just, help and support it. I don't think, stifling it or pushing someone in a different direction is healthy at all. I think basically if your kid has an interest, I would just support that and allow them to, kind of explore that. But, again, I'm not too well versed in that realm. So I don't know any specific, opportunities or things like that, and study opportunities for that. But I just think in general, it's important to support any interests that you see come up, because again, I think as has kind of been the theme of this webinar, it's so important that what you do in your kind of career is something that you're passionate about. And so I think like the question that was just asked about medicine, whether we have passion or if it's for career opportunities, I think if you want to survive, if you want to be able to, get through a degree and actually make a life out of it, it's got to be to do with passion. So basically, all I'm saying is anything that has passion is what you should be pursuing, I think. Not something that's simply just, good numbers on a page. I think definitely any passions that you see coming up, try and cultivate those and help your kid pursue those.
Okay, cool. So are there kids studying medicine with you from average public schools? Anastasia?
There are quite a few selective school kids, but I would say in terms of like your average public school, there's basically next to zero. There are a couple, but not many at all. And it's like a very, very, very big minority. I think definitely trying to get into a higher ranked school in year 7 is a massive thing you want to aim towards. It's not a deterrent at all. Like you can definitely still do it from an average public school, but the environment that you're in high school, I think definitely plays a big role into what you're going to get into. It's in terms of the people you surround yourself with. The reason why a lot of selective school and scholarship kids actually end up getting into medicine and other high ATAR degrees is because they're surrounded by people who also have very, very high goals and want to work hard. Whereas if you're in a school where everyone around you isn't doing that, you are probably not very likely to do that either. So that's one thing you want to consider. Also, in terms of scaling, like HSC wise, if you have a strong cohort, that also impacts your chances of getting into some of these higher schools. So there are kids that are, not the best students, but that go to very, very good schools that actually end up getting boosted by the very good students in their cohort. So that's another thing you want to consider.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Let's talk about, so we had a question just sent from Tanae who asked, can you talk a little bit about scholarly tutoring for high school? So yeah, we will talk about a little bit. Maybe Colin, do you want to give like an overview of what we do in high school foundations and what that kind of like is? I mean, you teach the program, I don't, so you probably know more about it than I do. So
yeah, so high school foundation essentially is, I think, we all kind of had to sit down and try to think about what would be the best way to basically solve all these problems we're talking about, approach all these solutions we're looking for. So like I was mentioning earlier in the webinar, that kind of idea of English, science, and maths needing a balance between those. High school foundation basically takes each of those aspects there and, basically does classes for English, science, and maths at a high school level and kind of puts kids ahead of where their current grade is, which again, we thought was a very crucial aspect for kids to have, to not fall into the kind of complacency of getting by in science and then, finishing off and going into year 11, 12 with the specialties and just absolutely being, out of your depth. Same with English, again, year 7 to 10, kind of coasting, getting by, and then year 11 to 12 being overwhelmed. So I think basically we were trying in creating high school foundations to try and solve these problems. And so it's essentially again, it's more about cultivating a love for learning. And while giving kids materials that is going to massively help them, it's also more for kind of setting them up for year 11 and 12, setting them up for the future in the way that the kids enjoy the most. Because I mean, to be honest, I don't know if there are any people watching from the high school foundations class or high school events class. They're a lot of fun. And, I like at the moment I'm teaching the maths class, and even when the kids are having, if it's a difficult topic, the fact of them being so curious to learn and enjoying it a lot, I actually find it's very enjoyable for me and for the kids, and it kind of just comes across as a good atmosphere. So I think personally, obviously very biased, but I really enjoy the approach that we've taken to this program. Cool.
Okay, so we have another question. What degree should I take in uni if I want to pursue a career in dermatology? So that's a medical degree, right? Like, yeah. How difficult is it to get into dermatology, Anastasia?
It's very competitive. Dermatology has become very popular lately because it has a pretty good work-life balance. So I think something that has become increasingly common recently that wasn't as much of a factor in perhaps our parents' generation is that work-life balance. So a lot of specialties that have a good work-life balance, like dermatology, have become very competitive because everyone wants to do them, because everyone still wants to have a life outside of work, and dermatology really allows for that. So it's definitely become a lot more competitive in recent years. And obviously, again, I can't predict the future, but I can definitely see that it's probably going to continue becoming more competitive as sort of our values in society shift towards that.
Cool. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about, I know this is kind of like a little bit more drawn out, but what are the work-life balance issues that you guys deal with in medicine? Obviously in medical school, it's not that big of a deal, but like in medicine, maybe James, you can talk about it from the perspective of yourself and what you've heard from, other doctors. And then maybe Anastasia, you could just add on to that with maybe more of a female perspective, on that kind of issue. So yeah, James.
So, yeah, that's a great question for anyone interested in medicine, because it's definitely a massive consideration. So, first of all, during your training, so after you finish medical school, you're essentially a junior doctor and you're going on some sort of training scheme in order to specialize for up to essentially 8 to 10 years. It's a long time. And when you're still a junior doctor, it's a lot of shift work. So longer shifts, that might be a night shift, which is obviously the grunt work and is quite difficult. And you're sort of on this trajectory towards a better work-life balance once you're a fully fledged specialist. And then once you're a specialist, it really depends, as Anastasia was saying with dermatology, it depends on what your specialty is. So for example, if maybe you're a dermatologist or you're some sort of pathologist, maybe your work-life balance is better. You'll have appointments during the day, then you go home. Compare that maybe to being a surgeon. Surgery is one of the specialties that's known for having the worst work-life balance, because really at any point, depending on sort of where you work in the hospital, at any point you could be possibly called into an emergency surgery, and that could last a really long time. Also, depending on what subspecialty you do, maybe that's different if you're an orthopedic surgeon compared to a neurosurgeon, where your surgeries can last like up to 12 hours. And then in addition to that, you can be on call. So even if you're at home, the hospital might ask you to come in or call you in the middle of the night for advice. And it really depends, I guess, your seniority within the hospital. So if you're at a later stage in your career, your work-life balance is going to be far better than if you're at a junior stage in your career. And I guess that's something you just need to weigh up with. Is the other really good parts of medicine worth it compared to the work-life balance? Also acknowledging that a lot of careers as well don't necessarily have the best work-life balance as well. Like if you become an investment banker or a lawyer or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, Anastasia?
And I guess sort of to add to that, from a more like female perspective, that is definitely something that's very tricky to navigate. And a lot of female doctors have struggled with that in the past, in terms of like, obviously, let's say you're a female and you want to start a family, you'll have to be the one that has to take time off to actually have a baby, and so on and so forth, right? So in terms of timing of that can be very difficult, because do you do it like when you're in medical school? That sort of deters your actual progression into the degree. You can lose momentum and so forth. If you do it after that, you already have a job, you have to manage kids, and a very demanding job in medicine. So I think if medicine is something that interests you, which obviously it is for me, and I'm obviously studying it, that was definitely something I had to weigh up. It can be very, very difficult being a female trying to navigate, STEM fields that are often very male dominated. So what you want to make sure that you want to do in these situations is, number one, there are going to be more opportunities opening up for females in STEM related careers, medicine, any tech fields as well, engineering, all that sort of stuff. Look out for those, because they are on the rise in recent years. And number two, have a good support network. I don't think just like being a female should tell you I shouldn't do medicine because I can't have kids. I don't think that's a good attitude to have. I think you can definitely achieve it, but you do need to make sure that you're surrounded with good people who will support you through that. And of course, again, choosing, a particular specialty or a particular subspecialty or niche field obviously changes the factors that have to come into that decision. But I think if you do surround yourself with people who will understand that and who will help you maintain that work-life balance, who will help you take care of kids or whatever else that's scaring you, you can definitely achieve that. And I think it's great that we're seeing a lot more girls going into all these STEM related fields.
Yeah, I would echo that. I would argue that in terms of STEM related fields, I personally think that girls are actually a lot better than boys. You know what I mean? In these areas, I think even in scholarly, and this is just an ordinary statistic, I would say the girls in scholarly are more studious and typically actually get higher marks than boys. Girls again tend to be more well-spoken than boys, even in high school, apart from obviously Colin and James, of course, you know what I mean, but girls in general. So I think there's just a lot of opportunities in as Anastasia mentioned, in STEM. So yeah, don't let the work-life balance aspect of things dissuade you from obviously pursuing that kind of career. Okay. Okay, cool. What are some other things? So what other careers have a good work-life balance? Are there any that aren't competitive, that are easier to get into, that are just as rewarding? Okay, I think when we talk about work-life balance, it's interesting, right? Because if you really wanted work-life balance, the easiest work-life balance would just be go to go to Phuket, Thailand, you know what I mean? Spend 500 bucks a week, 500 bucks a month on rent and just work remotely like on the beach. That would be great work-life balance. But I think when we talk about work-life balance, it really needs to be predicated on like what you enjoy. And so if you enjoy working 80 hours a week, that's great work-life balance. If you enjoy working 60 hours a week in like a career that you like love, then that's great work-life balance. So I think it would be wrong for us to kind of give you guys guidance on, okay, which careers have better work-life balance, but it's more so the question is what career is suitable to you? You know what I mean? Like, I think that's the more important question, because I'm pretty sure everybody here, you guys have to study very, very hard, but it doesn't feel like work because it's, enjoyable. It's towards a goal. It's towards something that you guys want, right? James, do you have any comments on work-life balance and just the whole notion of that? You seem
Yeah, in terms of that, I hear. Sorry, what was that, Steve?
I was going to say you're quite philosophical, so I'd like to hear your, wisdom and ideas.
I try to be, Steve. I try to be. In terms of work-life balance, I've been hearing recently people talk about this idea of not work-life balance, but work-life integration. So it's not I work, say, 8 hours a day, then I have the rest of the day to have my life. It's the idea that the work I do is part of my life. And if I do enjoy doing that work, then it really isn't work in and of itself.
Yeah. Cool. I think Megan asked another question. If someone is lazy but still wants a somewhat high-paying job, what careers would be rewarding? I think it changes all the time. I'd say the easiest one to get into right now is tech sales. There are a lot of very lazy tech salespeople who make a lot of money, but that changes all the time. So I would say it's probably best not to be lazy if you want a high-paying job. Yeah. So that's kind of dumb, actually, of a question. All right, cool. What kind of ATAR do you need for university outside of Australia, like America or other countries? Anastasia?
It is actually lower. And the reason why it's lower is because they are very much based on like essays for admissions, and they are based on extracurriculars. So most courses in Australia, you just get a score and you get in. Obviously, medicine is an exception to that. You definitely need an interview and so on and so forth. But majority of degrees in Australia are just an ATAR. And you get the ATAR, you apply for it, and you're guaranteed a spot. That's it. Whereas in the US, these scores are lower, but there are a lot more requirements, and there's definitely massive competition to get into those degrees. So you need to absolutely differentiate yourself from other people if you are looking at international admissions. You're looking at things like writing a very, very, very strong personal essay. A lot of US universities require that. So basically a statement about you is what you'd be writing in that essay. It's not an analytical essay. It's more about explaining who you are and your story. And you'd also be looking at extracurriculars. They will ask you about everything that you do. And you don't want to do just, the basic extracurriculars like, yeah, I play a sport. Yeah, I do this. They won't accept you with that, right? They're looking at things that actually show your passion as an individual for what you're trying to get into. These are very, very, very competitive universities. So those are the types of things that I would be trying to focus on if that's your goal.
One thing that I would add to that would be it's very expensive to go overseas for uni. And I would actually say that Australian undergraduate is quite strong. You know what I mean? There are very few countries in the world where you can get 2 degrees in 5 years. Australia is one of them. If you go anywhere else, if you go to like England, Oxford, you do a PPE. Like I know loads of kids who went to Oxford, Cambridge, did a PPE, wasted like $300,000 or $200,000 in like living costs plus a degree, came back after 4 years and did what we would consider to be like a really bad law degree, which is a JD of Sydney University. You know what I mean? Which everybody knows is like a second class, degree. And they'd come back and spend another $200,000 doing not $200,000, like $100,000 doing a JD, which is postgraduate law degree. And so they've just spent $300,000, $400,000 on degrees when they could have just done an undergraduate law degree at Sydney Uni, paid 50,000 and be done with it. So I would say if you want to go overseas, it's probably not the best thing to do, because most US degrees are like liberal arts degrees anyway for 4 years. It's all right, but I mean, based on the cost, it's not really worth it unless you go to like a Harvard or a, like an Ivy League school. And personally, it's just much cheaper to go overseas anyway for a master's, like a 1-2 year master's after completing undergraduate in Australia. So that's what I'd recommend. Unless, money's not an issue and you're a billionaire, then, you can do whatever you want. But if money's kind of like an issue, then you got to be aware of that. Okay, we had another question. I know a lot of parents are asking about software. Look, I don't have too much experience with software, but I do have a CTO. I do have a lot of coders. So one question was, what about jobs going offshore and outsourcing, like coding jobs going to India for a fraction of Australian developers? That's always been a thing. That's never not been a thing, right? So I think that's only going to increase, but Australian developers are going to be needed because Indian developers are great, but there's always like a little bit of a language gap / translation issue. That's why Australian developers are still in very, very high demand, especially good Australian developers for speed, right? So hopefully that's clear. Anything about software courses? I think I know a lot of people who do computer science degrees at UNSW, UCID, whatever. Most of those degrees are not the most useful. Most of it comes from actual practical experience outside of that, and doing additional courses outside of university. So that's what I'd say on that. Now let's quickly just get through the rest of this. Which one is better to get into medicine, James Frews, Meriden, or Skeggs? I'd say depends on what you want to get into. I think Anastasia said if you're trying to get into the Sydney Uni 99.95 program, I'd say they're all pretty much the same, because you only, like James Frews only had one kid get into medicine. My guess is Meriden Skeggs would also just have 1 or 2. So it doesn't really make that big of a difference. In terms of UNSW, it might be a bit different there. I'm pretty sure there's more kids getting in from James Frews compared to Meriden and Skeggs. But having said that, again, there's just a lot more smarter kids at James Frews as well. So just things to be aware of. Okay, let's quickly get through it. What jobs require high ATARs and what is the approximate ATAR of the following jobs? Apple CEO, Colin, can you tell me what is the approximate ATAR of the Apple CEO? What do you reckon? What would that ATAR be?
Look, I think to become the Apple CEO would be very difficult at this stage, but I believe the current Apple CEO did not receive an ATAR. So I think to try and answer that question will be very difficult. I mean, to those kind of positions where it's just like a one person, it's not really an ATAR that you need to achieve that. It's more like a lot of different experiences and things to go right in your life to achieve that kind of thing.
Okay, cool. We'll kind of cap it off. So I'll answer one more question. Any insight, employability in sports science in University of Sydney? I wouldn't do sports science. I would just do physiotherapy. Everybody who doesn't get in physiotherapy ends up doing sports science. So I just personally don't think sports science is very employable as a degree. So try to get to physio. It's basically the high tier version. Cool. And that's basically it. So last question, how many medical seats are there at Sydney University? Anastasia, it's like 40, right? 40 or 45?
Yeah. So if you're looking at undergrad, it is 30 domestic, so 30 people from anywhere in Australia, and 10 international. If you're looking at postgrad, it is 300 spots at UCID. Undergrad UNSW has about 150 kids. So it does get bigger when you go, obviously not to say that UNSW is a low ranked medical school, but as you do get into slightly lower ranks, they do have more spots available. Dentistry at UCID has less spots than medicine. So I have heard that the dentistry interview is actually harder than the medicine interview because it is a lot more competitive. So dentistry is off memory like a 99.65 ATAR, something like that, which means more people get into the interview, but less spots. So they have probably double or triple the amount of people in the interview than the med people and less spots. So they only have about 20 or so people max for dentistry undergrad, and then similar 200, 300-ish numbers for postgrad.
Cool. Well, good. Thank you for that, Anastasia. And I think that's about it. So we're definitely going to do another webinar. So, stay tuned for the next few weeks. Definitely going to do another webinar on, anything related to like high school and what to do in high school, what to do after selective. So please send any questions that you guys have. Otherwise, thank you guys, and please give Anastasia, Cullen, and James a big round of applause because they've been very, very insightful today. Cool, all good. Thank you guys. See you guys. Have a great weekend.
Having us.
Soon.